Here's a quote from Wendell Berry, which at first sounds kind of radical, but which, when you think about it a bit, uh, kind of sounds the opposite, kind of conservative. And I quoted this small piece because I think it makes a point, a pretty important point, fairly succinctly. Um, he says, I've quoted these sentences from Devoto because the obvious differences society is so clearly describing a revolution that did not stop with the subjugation of the Indians, but went on to impose substantially the same catastrophe upon the small farms and the farm communities, upon the shops of small local tradesmen of all sorts, upon the workshops of independent craftsmen, and upon the households of citizens. It is a revolution that is still going on. The economy is still substantially that of the fur trade, still based on the same general kinds of commercial items: technology, weapons, ornaments, novelties, and drugs. The one great difference is that by now the revolution has deprived the mass of consumers of any independent access to the staples of life: clothing, shelter, food, even water. Air remains the only necessity that the average user can still get for himself, and the revolution has imposed a heavy tax on that by way of pollution. Commercial conquest is far more thorough and final than military defeat. End quote. I got that quote from a chapter from The Unsettling of America that's up online as a PDF file. And it's part of a longer chapter which does detail a comparison between what happened to the Native Americans in the white settlers exploiting and killing the Native Americans and destroying their way of life, and the destruction of the way of life of the small farmer and craftsman and small businessman in America. Obviously, the two aren't to be equated by any stretch, and Wendell Berry says as much, but he says that the same process, the same motives, and the same techniques, basically, that slowly destroyed, or in some cases not so slowly destroyed, Native American culture and way of life, is at work in the destruction of the small town way of life, the small farm, the farming family, the farming community, the small businessman, because as business grows and as it becomes corporate and it becomes global, the imperative for profit in the business outstrips the ability of the old institutions to be able to serve it. And so the quote makes a great point that not at the end, but on this end of that process, you get a world in which people are not at all independent. In America, we pride ourselves on being independent. We don't want to admit that anybody or anything can influence us or that we really need anybody else. And yet we don't have the skills, we don't have the property, we don't have the know-how, we don't have the other people necessary to actually take care of ourselves in almost any way. And as he says elsewhere in this book, The Unsettling of America, this has a lot to do with the imperative of specialization within capitalism that at first makes sense, and it does make sense when it comes to trade, up to a point, but then specialization, especially since it becomes unhinged from necessity at all, as it's not specializing to produce goods that people absolutely need or even need, but that they want or that are more or less sold to them and imposed on them. And what you get is a people who don't know how to feed themselves, don't know how to get food on their own, don't know how to get clean water to drink on their own. He says, again, I'll just quote this again, the one great difference between then, the exploitation and destruction of the Native Americans, and now, by now the revolution has deprived the mass of consumers of any independent access to the staples of life, clothing, shelter, food, even water. Air remains the only necessity that the average user can still get for himself. Well, that's not the way that Americans like to think about themselves. But it does remind us that not that long ago, in previous generations, people were way more independent and self-sufficient. And that the economy, as it has developed, has deprived people of a great deal of that self-sufficiency and actually runs a lot of their lives. It creates desires and needs that they never knew they had until they had them. And people work long, long hours to fulfill the needs that have been imposed upon them by the economy, by the people who are trying to sell them things, which they actually just don't really need. And so this becomes a treadmill that people don't even know they're on, really. But anyway, I guess the point that I started with is that, typically conservatives think that capitalism is the path to independence and freedom. And I think that Wendell Berry, sounding a little bit more like a classical conservative here, and not a little bit like a libertarian as well, and somewhat of a liberal as well, is basically saying, you know what? Capitalism has developed to the point where it's stopped being a source of independence and freedom and has actually become a source of imposition and a lack of freedom. Now, of course, we can't do everything for ourselves. We can't become pioneer people and go and grow our own food, all of us, and all that. But think about this. We have local farmers and local craftsmen and local service providers. And yet, strangely enough, liberals are the ones who tend to talk about supporting local business. Local business, especially the local farmer, until very recently was the hub of the community. And that way of life was a way of life that sustained traditional values and kept families together. And now, if somebody talks about supporting local business, keeping your spending local, and especially buying from your local organic farm, you're going to be accused of being a liberal. I just find that really ironic, and I think that we need to rethink all of that. And surprisingly enough, Wendell Berry's a great place to start in rethinking that.